what has happened with Donald Trump and his sort of policies in Central Asia. He's talking about, Donald Trump says that he's going to reconquer the heartland, Central Asia. Really? What's going on, in your opinion, when it comes? He's talking about the investment, $35 billion to Uzbekistan. And they're talking about Kazakhstan, and maybe the base is going back to these countries. What is the importance of the Central Asia, in your opinion, Mike?
Well, the ostensible aim that he's talked about is having American companies invest in tungsten and rare earths. Kazakhstan has very heavy tungsten holds, and America thinks that it can replace reliance on China for tungsten. And the dream of Trump, the almost obsession, is rare earths. But I just don't see Kazakhstan being really much of a source of rare earths. The American oil companies have invested heavily in Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, and it was a disaster. It was called ecocide. The oil workers' unions all rose up and fought against it, and there's a very strong anti-American feeling, certainly against American mining companies and oil companies throughout Central Asia. And that's basically what Trump is going to be fighting about. And he's hoping that the financing for this is not going to come from the US government. It's going to come from the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. And they were who originally brought neoliberalism to Kazakhstan and Central Asia, and it was a disaster. What happened in Central Asia is pretty much what happened in the Baltics. Local kleptocracies took over. They registered the property in their own names. They made deals with the Western companies for payoffs and kept their money in the West. They took all of the best housing for themselves. And the IMF and the World Bank introduced the rule of law, meaning that it enabled the governments to foreclose on debtors, people who bought their houses on credit, and their microcredit was the big thing that was sponsored by the Americans and the IMF, by the neoliberals. It worked mainly through women, because you could bring social pressure on the women to repay all of the debts. And the suicide rates went up. And so the women actually led the opposition to the Western influence throughout Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan and the other countries there. And so the original reaction against the Soviet Union has given way now to a general feeling that things were much better back then. At least people had security of their housing. There wasn't the polarization, and there wasn't a wealthy billionaire class that has emerged in these countries, and nepotism by the rulers of these countries to their own personal families. It's really back to the 19th century in a way. So what we're seeing is it's more about minerals now. The 19th century, it was more about crops and opium and things like that. But all of this is really just a replay of what was called the Great Game, or the British called it the Eastern Question, the long fight between Britain and Russia, and now the United States against Russia and China for control of everything from Iran all the way across Central Asia to the Uyghur sections of Western China. So you're seeing this geopolitical game with mining companies playing the role, and the mining companies are probably the most unpopular countries in the entire region there. So that we haven't heard a word about what China and Russia are doing, and I think they're just letting America try to play its cards. But last week, the Kazakhstan foreign minister was in Washington trying to talk up Kazakhstan as a to make deals. And that seems to certainly the existing government is trying to make a deal that's going to benefit it all. And I think the deal they met with the Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick, who had negotiated a deal for the Kazakhstan railways before. And there's now a proposal between the Kovkaz, a capital fund, to invest in mining and some kind of profit sharing agreement with Kazakhstan that may not know all the intricacies of the Hollywood accounting that doesn't really leave many profits to be shared after paying all of the interest charges and management charges and other charges that are all put down. So the tension, the great game now is between neoliberal mining interests and what the Kazakhstan people are calling ecocide, destruction of the environment from all of the pollution and the spills that the oil companies have called, and China's Belt and Road Initiative on quite different terms and with a different philosophy from neoliberalism. So it's not only a geopolitical game now, it's a game between what kind of economic arrangements are going to be made. Will they be those of more or less socialist type BRICS arrangements, or will they be the neoliberal arrangements that the United States is trying to push right now?
Richard,
Yeah,
jump in.
I would add two dimensions to it. One, this strikes me as stunningly a replay of 19th and 20th century imperialism. This is Western countries, in this case the United States, seeing the opportunity for profit by either mining, which is as old as imperialism, and that goes back to gold and silver and all the other things that have been luring Europeans to go all over the world looking for places where they can get it cheaply or steal it or whatever is necessary, because it is so nicely liquid for them to use in the way they want. Sure, add tungsten, add rare earths. It was always shifting with the technologies that we have available, which determine which resource under the ground is more extractively interesting for profit than the other. So now there's these new ones, and now there's a new place to go get them. And the United States is going to try to do it, get other people to pay for it, despoil the environment. That's what they always did. This is not new. And I want to remind someone of a lesson. And the lesson is that the countries that were able to break away from the global capitalist imperialist arrangement, Russia in the 20th century and China now, are the success stories. They were, that Russia was then under the Soviet Union. I want to remind people, since it's so fashionable not to know this, that Soviet economic growth from the time of the revolution in 1917 till the time of the dissolution in 1989 was the success story of the 20th century. The most backward European country that had to go through, ready, losing World War I, then a civil war and a revolution, and then collectivization of agriculture, and then World War II, still came out at the end of the century having grown faster than anybody else, despite all of those setbacks. Extraordinary story. And China, we all know, is the other one. And what do they have in common? They were not part of they broke away from the colonial capitalist system. They're the success stories, the ones who did not allow what they're discussing for Kyrgyzstan or Kazakhstan at this point. Now, that's the first thing. The second observation, just adding to what Michael talked about, is I am very aware, and perhaps I am misguided here. I am aware that all the machinations, the 76, because I keep count, the 76 dead people that were killed in those boats, the so-called narco boats in the Caribbean and the Pacific. I'm aware that that is a process, together with the positioning of the aircraft carrier Gerald Ford, that is now off the coast of Venezuela. I'm aware that there's a positioning to do a little regime change in Venezuela in order to reaffirm the Monroe Doctrine and to grab one of the great oil repositories on this planet. And here comes the punchline. The Russians, with the implicit backing of the Chinese, have warned the United States not to do that. Now, this is an important, granted still symbolic, but an important step. It's that the Monroe Doctrine has just been nullified. The United States does not have some sort of understood right to dominate in the Western Hemisphere. The Russians are announcing they're here too. And if the Russians are there with ships and navy, which they apparently are, and then the Chinese are not far behind. And my suspicion is part of the attractiveness of having these meetings in the White House is for Mr. Trump to say, okay, if I have to take seriously you in the Western Hemisphere, well, you're going to have to take me seriously even more than you thought you did. Look, here I'm doing stuff right in your neighborhood here with the Central Asian governments. So you do have this geopolitical maneuvering around the very, it's part of the fluid adjustment of the world to the fact that the West is not the dominant economic player anymore. And everybody, the West included, is re-maneuvering, trying to figure out how to stay afloat in this rapidly shifting global situation.
Well, I think you're right to bring up the Monroe Doctrine, because the flip side of that was the promise that Europe, you stay out of the Western Hemisphere, we'll stay out of your hemisphere. And that's exactly not happening. So you're quite right, when you say the Russia and China are saying you've broken the deal. You've come over here, okay, tit for tat. This is what we're doing is symmetrical to your reactions and your actions. And basically, you're seeing Russia and China in this reacting against the West. But again, all of this goes back to the Mackinder's heartland versus the British-controlled seacoast and commercial areas. The whole idea of China's and Russia's, but mainly China's plans for the last 20 years has been to expand overland through Central Asia. There's a whole attempt to build railroads. All of this was replayed in the late 19th century, starting with Persia, when it was the Persian Empire that controlled most of this region. And in the late 18th century, Russia had reconquered what had been the northern Persian Empire, Azerbaijan, the Georgia, part of Dagestan were there. A dynasty, a local tribal dynasty, took over the Shah of Iran, the Khayar tribe, in 1789 and ruled it until 1925, and essentially reconquered this area. Russia then conquered it back, and Russia then used this conquest of what had been northern Persia to extend the railroad all the way through Kazakhstan and Central Asia, further west. further east. Well, Britain opposed all of this, and it fought the Crimean War against Russia to say Russia is our existential enemy. You can look at the U.S. and China today. That was Russia and Britain back in the Crimean War, and the sequel to that was the Anglo-Persian War, 1856 to 1857, over who's going to control the route to Afghanistan, which Persia had controlled, and it was fought over the city of Herat in western Afghanistan. And the British said, we've got to block Russia from getting access to India, because India was still the crown jewel that was giving the financial support for the British Empire, and essentially defeated Russia, defeated Persia, and took control of that. And the next half century, all the way through the late 19th century, saw Russia and the British both asking for concessions to build a railroad through this region, which was still largely under Persian control. Well, they were able to block each other, and Persia wasn't able to build a railroad until finally in the mid-1930s, the state did. It was afraid of getting foreign concessions, and the trauma of British investment all the way from Persia further east was so destructive that there was a general pro-Russian feeling. And after the Russian Revolution, the Russians had the support of the population in these regions, and there was ongoing warfare over who was going to control everything from Persia, that didn't become Iran until later, in Central Asia. And basically the British intervened with the military and settled things by overthrowing the Khar tribal dynasty with the Shah, the two Shahs, the Pahlavi dynasty, the father and the son who did a police state. When Persia granted an oil concession to Darcy of England in 1901, that led to the discovery of oil a decade later, and it was to keep after. I think what happened after that in Persia is what's going to happen in Central Asia. The Iranians elected Mossadegh as a leader in the early 1950s. The British MI6 and the CIA overthrew him, and the Shah tightened up a police state that was so awful, so oppressive, that the only place that people were able to meet to resist was in the mosques. And the result is that there was a Shiite leadership revolution that overthrew the Shah. This is pretty much what happened in the 1890s, when the opposition to the British takeover of Persia's tobacco and opium trade was opposed primarily by the religious leaders, who imposed a fatwa against smoking, and all of the water pipes were all broken, and essentially the Shah, the Khar tribal Shah, who had ruled for 50 years, was assassinated, and the British put in their own proxies. So this is the kind of fight that you're going to be seeing with what's now called the color revolution in Southeast Asia. If the U.S. plans for mining and for control and the support of the neoliberal kleptocracy succeeds in this area, there's going to be the same kind of revolution that there have been in other countries. And this is going to be the dynamic that's going to shape the next decade.